Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 338. Yes, I did get the chapter number correct this time. Hey everyone, and you're gonna see like there's Genshin playing in the background, just ignore that. Anyway, hey everybody, hope you're having a great day. We're gonna be talking about 338. Now, I gotta say, I personally love 338 for what was going on at the end, because it was hilarious. Come on, that's hilarious. This needs to be a meme later on. Um, but 338, I think, is for discussion purposes. I think it's a really interesting chapter. I do think it's a very simple chapter as well, but there's nothing really terrible about that. Most of the discussions for this chapter, I think, are going to be on the meta perspective as well in terms of general notes. And I am actually very excited to talk about that because I was reading just very quickly the Viz comments, and there's just a lot of discussion about whether or not Aoyama is deserving of blame, or whether or not the kids were correct in the way that they were handling things. Really interesting, and whenever we're talking about morals, is always like worth talking about a little bit because different people have different opinions on it. So if you're in for a moral talk, I kind of want to get in on that. But before we get there, let's get through the other general notes. I'm just speaking about the chapter. Okay, so general notes. I got two main ones. The first one I would like to say is, and this is one that we will elaborate on as we go into the page-by-page walkthrough, but it is extremely clear that the author is saying to the readers, hey, the Aoyama stuff is settled, don't worry about it. And for me, he's saying that there are some clear tells for me when I'm looking at the chapter. And ultimately, he ends it off with May, and I'm thinking like, okay, you know what? That final page was so hilarious. Yeah, sure, whatever, author. You're done with the Aoyama stuff in this light, like in terms of being blamed, or like, in terms of punishing him. You're done with it? All right, cool. I understand. Gotcha, author. I get it. I hear you loud and clear. Let's move on. May. Great. That was hilarious. So he got a lot of goodwill out of me for that one. I really appreciate that. But that is, in of itself, it is really interesting how he went about expressing that there's no point continuing with Aoyama and talking about his blame and all that kind of stuff. Like, the author is done with it. We're moving on from there. Now, the other big point for this chapter is really something that I didn't notice last week, and Sarge, a commenter, kept reminding me. And it's all about that Izuku asking for Aoyama to take his hand. And Sarge said it. Aoyama's tied up. How is he going to take his hand? And that was a really good point. And then this chapter came in here and he elevated it. And it's just so hilarious. And you know what? The first page of the chapter makes the last page look even stupider, because when you see Izuku in this first panel here, he is so far away from Aoyama. In context, this guy is like screaming across the room, take my hand, and Aoyama's over there tied up. And it was just so hilarious. And then you have Tsukachi just coming in there. No, he is not taking your hand. This guy, we got him in custody. He is not. There's no hand holding going on right here. I think that this was just so funny in the way that it was executed, and I think if I was there watching Izuku make his plea, first off, he's got to be yelling across the room. Everyone's watching him. He's telling Aoyama to take his hand, and it's like, how is he going to take your hand when you're so far? Like, at least go up and... I thought that Izuku was right next to him. If you saw that in real life, that would be so lame and so dumb. But it was overall very hilarious. But this leads me to another point about the author in general. On this channel, we talk a lot about how the cliffhangers really aren't worth a lot. Like, you really shouldn't take the implications of the cliffhanger seriously. Case in point, Toru, you should not take the implication of the cliffhanger seriously. And I do think that between chapter 337 and 338, we have another manifestation of that. Specifically, you have the author going to an emotional high, the whole take your hand thing, and then the next chapter is like, whoa, wait. You are not going to be hand-holding. Yeah, there will be no hand-holding. In fact, we're going to gag Aoyama even more now. What you have with the author is that he's kind of going to a high, and then when he reaches that chapter end, it's suddenly like a sharp decline. That's pretty much what it is. If you look at the actual flow from the chapter 337 to 338, Sukachi is the sharp stop. With him, the whole situation, all the emotion comes to an end. So what this actually says about the author, when you take into account all of his other cliffhanger strategies, is that it does seem like he is now prioritizing the week-to-week experience more than he is the coherency in the story. Like, reading this in a volume, it's just like the walkbacks are so, like, for this case, the walkback is so hilarious that it almost makes it feel like My Hero Academia is a parody. It almost feels like they're making fun of the emotional highness. Like, this feels like something that I would see like in One Punch Man or MASH during the early days, or Mashal, sorry, during the early days. Like, actually think about it. It does verge kind of on parody. You have the caricature of Izuku being the overly emotional protagonist, and then the straight man and Sukachi coming in there and like, bro, look at the situation. You're not going anywhere. I do think it's bordering a little bit on that parody. I would like to know your guys' opinions on that. But there's so many more things to say here. I liked what the author did here, because I think he did something really great in that he wasn't afraid to make Izuku look a little bit stupid, or he wasn't afraid to just bring in the cruel reality of the system into the whole situation. I think this actually worked really well in terms of the cliffhanger process. But regardless, if the author actually is prioritizing the week-to-week experience as opposed to the coherent experience when you're reading this in one straight shot, then it's fair to say that he's probably going to be doing this in many different ways with almost all of his cliffhangers. And that's relevant for the end of the chapter where you have the May stuff. Now, the May stuff, I think, is very comedic. I think that's the author just, giving a little moment of levity, which I think it's one of his better moments. I still remember when he had the characters making funny faces at the weird Nomu that popped out during the Shigaraki war fight. And I always thought that was a really bad placement for a moment of levity, just because those Nomu ended up being very dangerous. But with the May stuff, it's a moment of levity. I think it's nicely placed. And because it's a moment of levity, I don't know if the author is going to go through with the implication of Izuku's determined face. But if we're taking this model of week-to-week excitement, and, assuming that he's going to do this with also the comedic endings here, I think it's likely that next chapter we see that Izuku has actually stopped thinking, and his face kind of froze in that determined expression. The reason you can say that is because when you see Izuku taking the explosion in the face, he still has that determined expression. His hands are also frozen as Mei is provocatively on him. I think the gag's going to be that Izuku has just frozen up and he's no longer thinking. That's why his face got stuck in determination. That feels about right for what the author would do, because he wouldn't make Izuku a high effectivity harem protagonist now. But I'm sure that's going to be hilarious when we come into the next chapter. It's going to be hilarious any which way. If he makes Izuku keep the determination, or if he goes into Izuku's frozen up, either way it's going to be hilarious. But that's one big general note when it comes to just the structure of the manga in general. I'm actually really excited to see if that prediction, the prioritization of the week-to-week experience, is actually going to pan out for the subsequent chapters. Do I think it's a good strategy? Yeah, like, we can complain about it all we want, but the author knows what he's doing. He's made that clear with his jokes that he's made about the explosions. He knows what he's doing. I think he knows how the Shonen Jump game works. So honestly, because of the magazine that he's in, I can't really fault him for what he's doing here. It's just something that you gotta kind of get used to and just read along with. So those are the first two big general notes. Thank you all for going here. And now just very quickly to talk about the moral relativity of what's going on with Aoyama. So we're going to be talking about, like how much blame Aoyama has and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to try and approach it from a lot of different points here, because I do find the discussion really funny and also very intriguing. So for me, I'm going to just be very clear with Aoyama. I understand it. Like, he's a child. Not only that, he's rich, so he's most likely a sheltered child. He's also a sheltered child who's being emotionally blackmailed by his parents from the way that they're talking to him. He's not only being blackmailed by All For One, but the parents as well. You guys know I don't have a lot of kind feelings for the parents. That's probably going to cloud my judgment. But when it comes to Aoyama, I do think that he's done a lot of wrong. but circumstances being what they are, I think there would be some space for leniency with Aoyama. And in terms of the story here right now, if the author wants to say like, hey, we're gonna make it so that Aoyama can be a hero, you know what? I'm perfectly okay with it. As a reader, I'd rather the really simplistic kind of approach to this. And honestly, when the author is going in there and he's being really ridiculous for the point of saying that Aoyama is going to be in the clear, I'm pretty okay with it. Like, I'm not really gonna, I don't want to get caught up in the quagmire of trying to parse through this when it comes to Aoyama. Again, I do think that Aoyama has done definitive wrong here, but given everything that's going on around him, I'd be very okay letting him get away with a lot of different things. Now, mind you, that's a perspective that comes out from understanding every single thing that goes into the Aoyama equation. There is another perspective that is worth pointing out, and that is the idea of people following orders. We know that in history, people following orders under duress or under threat of being killed by their peers or something like that, ultimately something that takes away their autonomy. We know that is a phenomenon. We know that many tragedies are born on the back of people following orders from one corrupt ruler. When you look at it in that perspective, you know, Aoyama's case becomes a lot less sympathetic, because it's quite simply, why should I care that you were under duress when ultimately you're the one that goes on to do horrific things in the name of a person you don't even support? And I do believe that when you go into that perspective specifically, what you'll see is that people will tend to be more lenient depending on how much of a failure or how little impact a person following orders does. For Aoyama, for instance, if Aoyama actually leads to the death of many people, I think you're going to get a slightly different reaction depending on how the author frames the entire situation. Under that perspective, I don't think it would be unreasonable for Aoyama to receive some kind of penalty, but I don't think it would need to be the most aggressive penalty in the world. That said, there's Aoyama and then there's the parents. When it comes to the parents, I am sincerely less sympathetic. And you have to recall with the parents, there's another detail, that being that All For One has made Japan into a war zone. This is effectively a war. And you have the parents inside of UA telling Aoyama to continue working with the person that caused this situation. When you look at them, there's no way around it. If the general public hears that these people, even after seeing what All For One was capable of, are still trying to work with All For One, people are going to be significantly less sympathetic towards those two parents in particular. And mind you, Aoyama is the one that comes in there trying to resist his parents. When you see Aoyama getting told to do this by his parents, it's another thing that says that, okay, yeah, Aoyama doesn't have that much agency in the situation. And this actually goes back to the whole situation with Izuku telling Aoyama that Hagakure did him a favor. Because when it comes to these kind of situations where you have people following orders, the more damage they do, the less sympathetic people tend to be. That's why Hagakure going in for the block actually ends up doing Aoyama a bigger favor, because it's not another thing going against him when it comes to listing all his crimes and all the things that spun out from him. But there's no way around it. If people hear about what the parents were trying to do in a disaster, yeah, if Japan doesn't have a way of prosecuting them, they would 100% come up with wartime laws to make it so that Aoyama's parents go down for sure. But that also leads to another aspect of Hero Academia Society. Hero Academia Society is the kind of society that shamed Gentle and shamed his parents when Gentle, trying to be a good person, accidentally got in the way of a hero. We all remember this. We all remember the shame that Gentle went under. Imagine the society that did that. Imagine what would happen if they found out what Aoyama did. Imagine if they found out that Aoyama was responsible for villains attacking kids and severely maiming Aizawa. Imagine if people found out that Aoyama was responsible for Bakugo being kidnapped for at least more than a day and being held by villains. Imagine if they found out that Aoyama's the reason that there was another guy that went into a summer camp and pretty much did chemical warfare on the kids. If normal people find that out, Aoyama's done. There's no way around it. If it's the same society that criticized Gentle, he is done. His parents are done. Actually, if you want it to be really vindictive, and if you don't think that Aoyama is going to actually be charged, but you want him to suffer, the way to go about it really is to just release the information that, oh yeah, Aoyama was a traitor and this is all the stuff he did, and then you don't release why he did it until like 2 weeks later. Because as we know from our world, most people will just pick up the initial story and run with it, and then when they are proven or they are shown that there was more to it, they will be very hesitant to apologize, and a lot of time the apologies will be buried and the clarification will be buried under much content speaking of how much they hate someone like Aoyama. So if you really wanted to make Aoyama suffer, yeah, you just release the information without context and then release the context a few days later, and let society take care of the rest. So this leads to the other point, that really no one should be talking about this. And UA, for the position that they're in, they really should not be talking about Aoyama being a traitor. This has to be like hush hush. Because if UA says that they have a traitor after they promised to take care of the refugees, and people are like, you didn't find your traitor and it was this kid, UA wouldn't survive the PR storm. It'd be a PR nightmare. So when it comes to the Aoyama situation, considering everything, it's probably best that no one talk about it. Because Aoyama would be eviscerated in the court of public opinion, especially if they were to control the information. Well, another thing to point out too is Japan. Japan, of all places, with its legal system, would 100% probably toss Aoyama into the slammer, or at least his parents. Like they'd find a way. Japan, the land of like what, like a really high absurd conviction rate. Yeah, they'd find a way to get Aoyama to pay some kind of penalty here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the moral situation here. There was one more thing to add, now that I just recall. When it comes to people following orders, there's always a few little stories about the people within the system who, under the threat of death, if they were found out, worked within the system to try and save as many people as they could. Those people are remembered as heroes. Those people are remembered as heroes even though they were part of a particular organization. When we look at the Aoyama situation, there's no way around it. Aoyama has shown the shades of heroics, and Izuku brought it up. When Aoyama attacks Mr. Compress, that's his moment of trying to do something within his compromised position. There's no way around it. Aoyama did show some degree of heroism while being in his terrible situation. I do think if Aoyama was a little bit smarter, a little bit older, a little bit more resistant to his parents, maybe he could have done more, but he's a child, right? I'm not going to expect more of him. When it comes to the parents, though, the parents have shown no degrees of heroism within the situation, and that's why I'm even more confident saying that I don't really care what happens to the parents at this point. Yeah, they're victims, but like there's a line that ultimately has to be drawn here. That said, like whatever they do to them, I don't think it should be that. I don't think it should be that bad. But point is, when you look at the situation objectively, Aoyama is more heroic than his parents. There's no way around that, and that is something that I think we should all just agree on when it comes to these types of situations. Anyway, thank you for listening. We will now get into the page-by-page walkthrough. So, page 1, I already kind of made fun of this page. What's really cool here, though, is that Tsukachi is pointing out that some degree of justice needs to be had. And the thing with Tsukachi is, he's probably seen many people who look sympathetic only to then have them do something unprecedented. So he's speaking from a position of experience. And ultimately what he goes on to say, that being about we can't guarantee that he's not booby-trapped. I actually think that's a really good idea. I think it's a really good idea to have Aoyama go to Central Hospital. I don't know what Central Hospital is going to be able to find, but 100%. And when he's talking about Aoyama not being allowed to speak, I'm assuming that he's meaning that it might be a trigger word that allows All For One to blow up Aoyama. So he wants to be careful of that as well. So all things considered here with Tsukachi, he comes in as a very neutral force. He's representative of their system. But I do think that at least when it comes to the whole thing with Central Hospital, I think that's a really great idea. Like, yeah, actually, we were making fun of this last week. We have no way of knowing if Aoyama's going to actually blow up. We're supposing and we're hoping but you never really know. Now, the author did something really cool with the next 3 panels on page 3. I actually like, the little thing of Izuku crying, Tsukachi looking away from Izuku and then going up, really showing this a really tense situation. But then we have this whole thing about why didn't they inform All For One about the raid in Camino? And I'm just thinking, like, did parents know that the police were going to raid? Why would parents know that the police were going to raid? Why would the parents know that All Might and the rest were going to launch an operation? Why did the parents know that the PR thing was a lie? So I'm going to be looking into the old chapters because I don't understand why we would tell parents that we're doing a super secret operation that requires people not knowing that they're doing a super secret operation. But whatever. We get the info, and someone, if you have the answer, please let me know. But then we have the thing that the All For One communication is one way. I think that's pretty cool. I think that's smart for All For One. And then you have Izuku leading us into the idea about using Aoyama to the advantage. So last week we were talking about this because last week we were talking about the panel of Bakugo saying, I get it now. And as you see in this chapter, Bakugo's panel doesn't really go anywhere. It's just something that the author puts in there. So given that it doesn't get picked up here, that must mean that the Bakugo panel is going to be important for later. I do think at this point, if Bakugo wasn't thinking about using Aoyama, he must be thinking about the way that they are going to enter the fight. And that's probably going to be talking more about what outlook Bakugo is going to be telling other people to have. Like, Bakugo probably, I would say, is going to have a scenario where he says, as he's going in to fight people, maybe not All For One, but as he goes into this, like, the goal is to save these people as best as we can, as opposed to just beating them down and forgetting about them. So I think that we have to keep an eye out for this, because Bakugo's probably going to have a rhetoric here. Ultimately, Ochako and Izuku right now are the ones that have the save villains rhetoric. Bakugo has no reason to actually have that rhetoric right now, but if he got inspired from Izuku, that might be the way of making this work. So if we're going to try and make this work further, we could say even later on that Bakugo might have a little bit of a flashback, thinking back to how Izuku was approaching Aoyama. That's what I would say, given how the author built the Bakugo thing, because it just doesn't make sense to have the Bakugo panel there by itself, because it literally adds nothing to the situation other than indicate a different perspective. Anyway, we go into page 4 and 5, and we have Kaminari pointing out that we can steer how the villains join the fight, with them pointing out that Aoyama is the only one that can deceive All For One. You also have Aoyama asking, like, why would they turn to me when I'm a despicable villain? So you understand what's going on here. Like, the author is trying to build up Aoyama's characterization, but the thing is here, it's a little bit silly, and it kind of says that Aoyama's not a very good listener, because they just went through their entire process of thinking why it's possible for him to be the one to deceive All For One. Like, they've quite literally spelled it out for him. But mind you, what he's drawing the issue with is like, why would you trust me to do that kind of thing? It's just really funny on that first read through. But yeah, the author wants to make it very clear that Aoyama does not have a good self-image. You then have Present Mike, the guy who first brought up the idea that there was a traitor among the students, as being the guy to ask, can you really trust Aoyama right now? And then this is where we go into the segment where it's very clear that the author doesn't want us to think about this anymore. As you say, Ida just says it's all in the past. And then Ida also points out that it's their responsibility for not being able to know what was going on with him. Now, mind you, these people are children. Not only that, they're being tutored by All Might and Yue. All Might does not have people skills. We know this. Yue most certainly does not have any kind of critical thinking faculties when it comes to treating kids well. To this day, I will never understand how you could tie up Bakugo and put him on national TV and think that was okay. Actually, we know that wasn't okay, because ultimately that's what leads Shigaraki to try and think that Bakugo is one of them. So no, Yue is not like the best place. When you have these horrible role models for these kids, it's not their fault that they couldn't see what was going on with Aoyama. And props to Aoyama, he was also a really good trader in this regard. But when Ida says that it's their fault they were unable to see what was going on with Aoyama, to make it clear, that's also Yue's fault. Especially Yue that has Super Genius Nezu. It's more the fault of the faculty than it is the children who were not able to suss out who the traitor was. Anyway, you have Ida pointing out that he wants to reach out to him as friends, right? And I think this is just building off of the idea that Ida wants to be able to help people who are crying. That's why you have him pointing out the weeping and despair. So that was actually a really good reaffirming for Ida there. Good job on the author for that one. But then you go into page 7 where you have Ida saying that they want to make him his equal again. Now, mind you, this is a little bit complicated, and this is again the author forcing the situation. You can understand the feelings going into this, but you have to be really careful. Depending on the manga, like this line of thought, we can once again make him our equal, our peer. The desire to want to save someone in Hero Academia is probably going to work out, but in another series, wanting to save someone and never seeing how he can be a bad person or how he can go on to screw you over again, this would be a dangerous rhetoric. But mind you, because we are on the idealistic bend of Shonen Jump, we can actually accept this kind of line of thought as being the one that would lead us to the right answer. But you have to be really careful. Like if someone wants to do a deconstruction series, this kind of thought is the one that gets destroyed. We then go into the bottom page 7, which I think is another interesting little bit here, because people say that all of 1A was ready to forgive Aoyama. But you have Bakugo, and I think Bakugo probably has a good reaction to this. He wants to do 5 blasts of his howitzer impact to make them even. And it's like, yeah, I remember Bakugo was tied up for at least a day, surrounded by villains, including the smelliest of them all, Dobby. I can't even begin to imagine the amount of torture like that must have been. This kid only got through it because he's Bakugo. So if he feels like he wants to get some kind of vengeance out of Aoyama, then good on him. Because, yeah, actually, Bakugo was face to face with All For One. He ultimately had to hold back, 3-4 different villains when they were trying to capture him? Yeah, no, man, like 100%. It's not a little bit extreme. Aoyama got Bakugo caught by the people at the center of the current disaster. Let him do whatever he wants. But the fact that the author has Bakugo being countered by Zero is the other big indication that, okay, he wants us to really forget about this. He wants us to think like, okay, yo, hitting Aoyama with howitzer impact, even though you guys do this for your little competitions and all that, even though Bakugo gets to blast Izuku whenever they're training, you know, 5 blasts of that impact, not worthwhile here. Then you have Kirishima, who pretty much frames how we should be thinking about this by saying that he was helpless against All For One. The helpless word is very critical here because it continues to paint Aoyama as a victim, and what the author is trying to do is to try to take away agency from the characters. This seems to be the same strategy that he might be employing with Shigaraki. By taking away agency from characters, he makes it look like they are less responsible for what they do. But mind you, some people can be useful idiots. That said, it is worth pointing out Kirishima does say something valuable in that he tried to get his folks to put an end to the deal. I don't think he did that early on, but I do think we could see some kind of semblance of that in like the recent chapters. Now, this is where the author really overplays his hand. It was a little bit worse in the spoilers, so I'm glad that they fixed it up a little bit for Viz. But when Kirishima goes into page 8 and he says, when we went to grab Izuku off the streets, did we care about him being quirkless at one point? No, they didn't. So that's just saying like, Aoyama, we don't care that you're quirkless, whatever. Did we hold it against Izuku for keeping a secret, for holding back those tears? No. So what's really interesting here is like, why are you bringing up the thing about being quirkless? Like, there's bigger fish to fry here. Aoyama is responsible for Aizawa getting his face caved in. Like, what was it? His ocular cavities were really destroyed after that fight with the Nomu. Aoyama is responsible for Bakugo being kidnapped. So what you have here is that Kirishima brings up the stuff that's really convenient for him, but he doesn't bring up, hey, like, you know, we're not going to hold it against you for getting villains to attack us, separating us, severely injuring All Might and Aizawa. We're not going to hold that against you. We're not going to hold it against you that you kept a secret that you were working for All For One. We're not going to hold it against you that you let the villains know where our camp was and ultimately got a bunch of us knocked out unconscious and got Bakugo kidnapped. We're not going to hold that against you either. We're not going to hold against you that you were potentially prepared to also kidnap Izuku. So this is actually ultimately very clever on the author. Like when you want to control the way the audience thinks, you don't bring up the things that are inconvenient for the narrative. That said, to talk up to the guys that were on the live stream, some people have pointed out that, well, Izuku's technically responsible for a lot of the trouble that 1A got into, but not really. With USJ, we know that the Shigaraki and the villains wanted to take out the symbol of peace, and they wanted to take down the symbol of what UA represented. They didn't really know what Izuku was about at that point in time. Similarly with the summer camp, they were going after there to make society shake. They wanted to target the kids because the kids were from UA, and if anything, the target for summer camp was Bakugo. Izuku wasn't really that big of a deal at the time. So you gotta be a little bit careful here, but the big thing to take away here is how the author ultimately frames the situation. It's very intelligent on his part. And by making this a situation about the quirkless issue as opposed to Aoyama almost got people killed, it kind of helps. Now we have a really interesting bottom panel here where Tsukachi goes in and says that All For One won't believe any lies. So this is the interesting thing. If they're talking about using Aoyama to deceive All For One, but Tsukachi's saying that All For One won't believe lies, then where does that ultimately leave us? This is actually a really important thing because the fundamental premise has already been crushed in one go. And actually, it's really strange that the author would have it so that this is the one thing that the Aoyama family tells Tsukachi. So, as I'm looking at this, having this note come in there and Tsukachi again being the one to deflate the situation here, it like that would indicate to me that the final plan that we go into here will be less about lying and be more about being clever about something. Like there might still be some layer of deception going on, but yeah, actually, if All For One won't believe lies, and if he actually has a mechanism that allows him to know what a lie is, then 100% you need to keep a cool head about this. And we'll also have more points to talk about when it comes to cool heads. Moving on, we have page 9 where Aizawa is talking about his plan and all that kind of stuff. I like that he says that he's responsible too. I fully agree. And Aizawa says he had no intention of expelling Aoyama. Like, for me, I'm just thinking like, okay, it's a war zone. You guys might not be back to normal for like years. I legitimately don't care about Aoyama being expelled or not. But, it's a symbolic gesture. It's a gesture. It's like, it's Aizawa's thing. It's like, okay, got it. We move on to page 10, and here we have Aizawa saying that he has an idea. Now, I am very curious about this. And we go into the next page, and it says we need to inspect each and every location. So that's interesting. That's actually pretty critical. So your plan revolves around looking at each and every location. Which locations that are relevant to who? Aoyama? Are you looking at every location that Aoyama was in? Because are you trying to find the communications? Are you trying to intercept the communications? Really interesting. And then we have it all depends on him. So who's the him? Is it Aoyama or is it someone else? Really interesting. Given that Tsukachi's even thinking about this, and given the kids are surprised, I'm really wondering. I'm wondering what it is. I'm going to make the bet that it's going to be less about deception and more about being clever and finding a clue in one of those locations. Because, like, really, when you think about it, knowing that Aoyama is a traitor, what you really get out of it is, if Aoyama is a traitor, we know places to check, technically. Anyway, we move into page 12, the next big page. Now, page 12 is mostly textless. There is something I want to point out here because the author took the time to draw it. You have Kirishima saying we'd better prepare, and then you have this shot of the glasses of water. So I think what the author was trying to say with the shot of the glass of water is pretty much, oh, okay, look, they got cold water. You can tell it was cold because it's precipitating, and they haven't drunk it. So in other words, what you're trying to imply is that the kids have kind of gotten back to their home, but they aren't really relaxed. You can see that some kids are doing chores and whatnot, but the water is there to symbolize that they're not having a fun time. They're not leisurely enjoying themselves. They are in a really tense situation. And so the ones working are just kind of, doing busy work. We then move into page 13 where Toru is saying it'll work, this will bring him down, and everyone goes into the big angry panel. Okay, on the live stream we had a lot of fun with this, so I just want to go through the highlights of this really angry panel before talking about it. Koda, to reference White Despair, Koda looks very scary. He looks like he's about to impale someone on his horn. That's courtesy of White Despair. Bakugo looks like Bakugo. Ojiro looks like he has just decided he's gonna kill someone. Momo too looks like she's like Momo is like she has the kind of expression that someone just foiled her plans and she is very upset. Like you are gonna be dumped in a vat of acid. This is gonna suck. Jiro actually looks like a girl from a delinquent manga who just got like really offended that her like little sisters got beat up or something. Ida looks kind of constipated. Tsuyu looks comical. Mineta and Sero also kind of look comical. Kirishima looks like a fairy tale character who just saw his friend get beat up and now he wants to get fired up and beat them up. And Ochako is like whatever. And yeah, those are my highlights there. Again, though, Ida looks constipated. Now the bigger note for this part here is I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea for all these characters to be getting angry. I think only one actually no. I think maybe only 2 characters are actually able to deal with this. And it's Bakugo and Ida and maybe Izuku. The reason it's not a good idea to get angry is because getting angry at All For One has led to nothing but trouble. Think about it. Like, really think about it. Like, this is a perfectly valid point. The kids should not be getting angry in this situation. Or they should be like, they really should be trying to maintain their calm. All Might gets angry at All For One. Gran Torino is there to chastise him for getting angry at All For One because it's not going to work. Izuku gets angry at All For One. All For One starts playing games with Izuku. Poor Izuku, in all of his anger, goes into despair mode, and now he can't think straight, and everyone has to go save him. Furthermore, and then finally, Shigaraki. Shigaraki's whole life sucks because he keeps getting angry at All For One. Everything's working to All For One's plan because All For One thrives on people getting angry at him. That's why he talks the way he does. All he ever wants to do at any moment in time is to make people angry at him because he understands if they get angry, they get careless. And here's the other big issue. With Hero Academia, anger, you know, the author plays a dangerous game in that anger for One For All works out really well. But you also have other moments in Hero Academia like the Stain arc, which is why Ida's probably one of the people better equipped to actually handle anger at the same time as a goal. But when you look at the Stain arc, the big point of that is that Ida was clouded by anger and hatred. So most certainly in Hero Academia, where anger at All For One has been portrayed to be a terrible thing, a moment like this where everyone is showing such angry faces, the author is really, he has a good setup here to make this not work out for them if he really wants to. Now mind you, because we're approaching the end here, will the author make one final big note about anger being the worst thing you can take to All For One? Maybe, like that would be really cool, but this might be one of those moments where the rhetoric of Hero Academia breaks apart to say, oh no, anger was justified in this particular moment. But really, if you were looking at the rest of Hero Academia, 100%, it is okay to say you probably shouldn't be getting angry at All For One. You probably do need clear heads on this particular situation. Izuku in particular really knows. Anyway, we go into page 14 and 15. Like, we already talked about this. It's hilarious. They're hilarious pages. I love it, man. I think this was a great way of bringing back Mei. Really nice callback. And we knew that Mei was coming back because we saw her design in the volume preview. So it's pretty cool to actually see her back here. Yeah, no, man. Like, the final 2 pages are really fun. And it's cool that we're going to be going towards fixing up their outfits. Now, as we go into the future of Hero Academia here, I think like a 2-stage battle is probably the way to go. Like one battle to take out physical All For One, then the final battle with Shigaraki. Will these be their final costumes? I think this might be like the second to last costume, if not the final costume. But yeah, that was Hero Academia. We did have a lot to talk about. We've gotten back to a 40-minute video, but I hope you guys enjoyed. There was a lot to cover, and yeah, can't wait for the next chapter. It's going to be so much fun. Anyway, till next time, have a great day, everyone.